everybody, welcome back to Designing in Color's 2020 webinar series, the GRIOT. This is part 2 of episode Multilingual GRIOT's storytelling. As an effort to highlight multiple languages, in today's episode we will host the first half in English and the second half in Spanish. I'm beyond excited for our second guest, who is a powerhouse and has done amazing things here in Phoenix, Maxima Guerrero. She is an entrepreneur, an activist, an educator, a dreamer, and a leader. It's a pleasure to have you speak with me. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing pretty good, I think. Thank you.
Well, before I introduce you any further, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. I know you've been through extremely rough moments these last few weeks, and I'm just glad to know that you're doing okay.
Yes, I'm doing a lot better now.
Maxima Guerrero is a native of Morelos, Mexico, and resides on occupied Akimel-O'odham territory, also Phoenix, Arizona. Her passion and commitment to community organizing and advocacy for social change comes from personal experience and exposure to the hateful rhetoric that derives from politics. Maxima has been a part of both national actions and local mobilization since 2010. Maxima has been engaged in multiple social issue and electoral campaigns, which include the historical recall election of Russell Pierce, Operation Butterfly, DACA implementation, Basta Arpaio, and most recently, the Vote for Dream campaign, a sustained lobbying campaign in DC to advocate for a permanent solution for dreamers. She holds experience in political education, popular education, and training in multi-generational and bilingual settings, while acknowledging the intersection among various social movements. Maxima is a DACA recipient, part of the Dream Summer Program Alumni Council, Youth and Leadership Development Director at Puente, Arizona, and is also the co-founder of Ganas Apparel, a cultural conscious athletic brand. Bienvenida, Maxima. So, just to let everybody know that's watching this video, I met Maxima about 6 years ago through Stylos Awards, which was an event to raise money for scholarships for Latino students. And it's a very different than the work that we both do. It was like a runway fashion show. The event was to fundraise, so it was quite a very different setting that we got to meet each other, and it's been amazing to get a glimpse of the work that you do over the years within the community, and I'm very inspired by everything that you do and that you keep on doing, and you just seem to never stop. So thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, I remember that experience is so different than like everyday life, but I guess it's like the experiences you just have throughout life.
I want to begin our conversation by talking about a topic that hits close to home for me when it comes to the American dream. And it's something that has been making headlines recently with ICE and immigrants and a lot of other things going on in the country. And as a daughter of an immigrant myself, being a first generation in my family in this country, it's one thing to be a citizen from an immigrant, and it's another thing being a dreamer. And whereas I am privileged to be able to go about my life without ever fear of being deported. And that's why I want to highlight your story, because it's something that is very relevant and a lot of people can relate to. And in order for people to understand who you are and the work that you do, could you please explain what a dreamer is for those that don't know what that term is?
Yeah, so a dreamer, and just like highlighting on that, is like I have siblings that are citizens too, and so it's this thing around like mixed status families and the experience of being in a mixed status family where some people can, are undocumented, some folks are citizens, and then some people have DACA, and it's a really huge spectrum, I guess, in immigration policy here in this country. The term dreamer came out of federal legislation that has been proposed since 2001. It has never passed through Congress, but every year a different version of it is reintroduced. So the DREAM Act, it was a Development Relief for Alien Minors Act, was sort of like what coined the term dreamer, which is someone who came to the U.S., be under the age of 16, has no criminal record, came and went through the educational system in this country. So it's basically a term that is given to identify people who are young people who migrated to the US. And yeah, so now people call us dreamers. There's also a lot of, you know, when I first got involved in 2010, the newspapers were writing about us as illegal immigrants, right? And some media still uses that term, but over time we've been able to shift that public narrative of not being called illegal aliens in the news and medias, but really shifting that narrative and I guess how people, or in general, what people call us.
Yeah, and I bet it must be hard growing up in this country, not knowing of your legal status, and then to find out later on that there are certain things that you're not able to have, like being able to work legally for most of them, and a lot of missed opportunities just because of that status. You know, what are some of the struggles as a dreamer in this country, for example, when it comes to education or attending college, scholarships, opportunities, just to list a few?
Yeah, something specifically here, you know, in Phoenix and in Arizona in general, we're, you know, became ground zero for anti-migrant legislation. And that started, you know, in 2010 during SB 1070, but even before, we had things like Proposition 300, which forces undocumented students to pay out-of-state tuition, regardless of your merit, regardless of how well you did in school, how great of a person you are, you have to pay out-of-state tuition. You can't get an ID or a driver's license. You have to basically go through life trying to figure out how you're gonna make it happen. You can't get a job, you can't drive, and everything is a constant fear of possible deportation and getting tangled up into the system.
A lot of people don't understand that your life gets affected in so many ways. So that's why I want you to talk about these things. I wanted people to understand first what a dreamer is and the implications of that as we move on to this next part. So during the Black Lives Matter protest here in Phoenix a few weeks ago, which took place right after your birthday, I believe, from seeing on your social media, happy belated birthday, you were a victim of a traumatic event due to the collaboration between police and ICE, which ultimately threatened your status in this state and in the country. Would you mind sharing what happened that night?
Yeah, so, you know, that, like, we can see this uprising that has come for the past couple of months, for the past few months, in response to the deaths that we see on our social media, on the news, and this constant repetitive thing around, you know, the murdering of Black lives. And that weekend, that specific week, was the death of George Floyd that we saw. Here locally, it was also Deion Johnson, who was killed by DPS when they were just inside their vehicle. So it was this constant incidents that we were seeing, and community and people that wanted to come out and stand up against and speak out about the situation and expose ultimately the abuse of a police department and law enforcement. And so that weekend, it was the day after my birthday, so it's like, oh, happy birthday, you know, this is gonna happen. But I was out at a protest doing legal observing and kind of like as a support. So we know that the Phoenix police is one of the most violent in the country. We know that they have pepper sprayed protesters during rallies and protests, and we know that they are willing and able and do have force. Like they use excessive use of force. And so that night, we were ready to head out. I was a passenger in a car. We were driving away from the protest, and all of a sudden, about, 5 patrol cars block the road, the street that we were on, and preventing the car from leaving the street or driving more in the street. And they did that in all of the surrounding areas, all of the surrounding streets. They basically blockaded and blocked off everything all at once. And then from there, the officers got out of the car. They draw their weapons saying, hey, get out of the vehicle. The driver gets out first. And then while the driver that is getting out, backing up into the police officer to be handcuffed, I'm still in the car as a passenger, and I'm trying to send out a voice message like, hey, we're about to be arrested. And I send it out to a group of other volunteers who were there. And having DACA, like being involved for a long time, having DACA, knowing the risk of just the interaction with the police in this way, I know that I can't be arrested without letting anybody, I can't be arrested without somebody knowing what is happening. And so, yeah, as the driver is getting out, backing up, I'm in the car trying to send out a voice message, letting people know. Thankfully, that was sent out, and I was able to send it out. And then, they're like, okay, passenger, keep your hands up, get out of the car. I put the phone in my pocket, and then I get out of the car and back up into an officer to be handcuffed. That night, we were taken in to a police precinct, and then throughout time, we were eventually transferred to 4th Avenue Jail. So here locally, the sheriff, Paul Penzone, collaborates with immigration. This is something that is discretionary. There's no like law that says that this is what he needs to do, but it's his discretion, and he allows ICE to be in 4th Avenue. So because I have DACA, that triggers an immigration hold, which essentially means after I'm released from the jail, instead of being released to the outside, I'm gonna be released to the hands of immigration. We're all in the jail. There's 114 people that were arrested that night, and we have our first hearing. During the first hearing, the judge found that there was going to be no probable cause, that there wasn't any probable cause for the arrests, but I still have an immigration hold. So while everyone that I got booked with, that I went to court with, is getting out of jail, I'm still there, and I'm held until immigration comes and picks me up to be transferred over to ICE.
That's very unfortunate that happened, and I'm glad that it didn't get into a worse situation. And I saw when I was watching the live feed from Puente when you were released, and just seeing the people gather out there for you, I can't imagine what that must have felt like, just knowing the potential future that might hold for you because of that incident where you were not doing anything wrong. And this event happened just a few days after you and I had just talked about planning this interview. And so I was completely in shock to find out you were under ICE custody. But what was so beautiful to me to see was how quickly the people of Phoenix gathered and fought for your release. And that was just amazing. And that goes to show how truly important you are to this community and how much you mean to them. So they, that's the beauty of the power of people, the power of gathering and using your voice to help someone that is in dire need. Going back to the work that you do, being involved with Puente AZ, having a leadership position there, or other community organizations, could you talk a little bit about the work with Puente and what kind of led you into activism?
Yeah, so I started being involved in 2010, and it was pretty much because I didn't know what else to do. Like, I had graduated high school in 2008. Right after graduation, I guess I came to realize, in high school I was a good student. I should have been in college. I should have been getting scholarships, but because of my status and I not having a social security number, and the Arizona laws, I was not able to do that. And so it led me in this hole of not knowing what I could do, I didn't think that I had any options or opportunities. It was really this hole of what am I going to do? And I'm also the oldest from my siblings, and so my parents would go to work, my siblings were still in school, and I would just be at home not knowing what to do with my life. But also, then I started researching more about, what does it mean to be undocumented? And I'd go to the public library and like do research there. And I came into this thing about the DREAM Act. So I started reading about it. I started posting about it in MySpace because that's what I used back in that day. And one of my high school peers, my high school friends, he's like, hey, there's this group of undocumented students at ASU. You should go check it out. And I was like, okay. So I traveled from like West Phoenix to ASU in public transportation, which is like, I don't know, over an hour. And I found myself in a room with other undocumented youth who were talking about this DREAM Act, and they're like, if we just get all these petition signatures, we're gonna get this pathway to citizenship, and life is gonna be amazing. After that came SB 1070, and I was like, I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't even know that like who our governor was until I heard her name, that she was gonna sign it, but I had no idea what our political like structure was, who people were, or anything like that. But it was the first time that I felt being in a sense of community. I related to other people, and it was same people in my circumstances that were getting together and trying to figure out a solution or trying to do something. So I said, if there's something that I can do for my situation, I'm gonna go and do it. And throughout time, working on different campaigns. Now I've been at Puente for the past 2 years. And through there, I've been leading most of our youth work, which is working with high school students, leadership development, and then their advocacy on how to shift policy, how to shift different things inside the high school district as well.
Yeah, that's good that, being unsure as to what the path for you would be, it led you to a lot of community engagement to the point where now you're helping other people discover the political system and discover what other things will affect them. Speaking of the youth, as we know, they are the future, right? And it's important for us to work directly with them and to be able to host spaces for them, creating safe space for them to engage in conversations. And you touched a little bit on what types of engagement. What's one in particular that is special for you in working with the youth?
I think that it's just about and you mentioned providing them a safe space to share. A lot of times we look at youth, and most of the youth I work with are high school aged, and most of the time as adults we look at young people or younger people, older adults, younger people, and look at them as they're just youth, they're just kids, they don't know what they're saying, they don't know what they're talking about. And I think what's become really sort of like a highlight is when you provide a young person to share their thoughts, share their ideas, share their suggestions, and you really listen to them, how smart and brilliant young people are, and how that can completely shift the way that a group works together. But I think just providing the space for young people to come and to engage in a conversation without being shut down or told that they're just kids is really kind of great to see them grow in that way, to share their ideals, and after sharing them, not doubting what they have just said, because that's how they truly feel. So I really enjoy creating just spaces of conversation for them to share how they're feeling on what's happening in the world, but then also how they feel that needs to be changed at the same time.
Yes, it's very important to listen to the youth. A lot of adults tend to overlook the opinions of teenagers. Teens are watching. They're watching us too. And they are being affected by our actions that cause other things upon them. And by not allowing them to speak, by not allowing them to express, it creates a lot of negative effects on them. And I'm glad to hear that you're creating these safe conversations for them to engage in. And it's something that, it's interesting that you talk about that, because us as designers, we do that as well. We strive to create spaces to make people comfortable to be in and to engage in as well. And speaking of safe space, us in Designing in Color, we've been focusing a lot on the idea of sacred space and what that means. So I'd like to ask you, how do you define sacred space, and what does a sacred space look like to you?
Great question. I think it's very, I don't know. I think for me, it's what kind of space can I be? I don't know. What kind of space can I be my best self? A place where I don't have to consciously be thinking about what I say or what I want to share. And it's a space that really values myself and everyone who's around me as like a whole human. Like, I think also like part of, I guess, being a human is like we have complexities within ourselves, right? Like there's always going to be whether it's like chipping away at things that we grew up believing that we don't believe in anymore, but that work takes a long time to go through, or whether it's like being aware of what harm you're trying to repair that was done in the past, or that is just like part of the lineage of people you come from. So a space that can support that and also hold the fact that we are complex, that we hold clashing ideals even within ourselves, but we are able to be in that space to work through that conflict. And I think, overall, I think you can feel when a space is strange or I guess fake. But I think just a place where I can just really express or share in a way that doesn't limit what I want to be or do.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think that it's something that I'm curious, not just myself, but the group. We're very curious to see how people define sacred space, especially when we come from different backgrounds. And you that are not necessarily of a design background, you're doing more activism work. And so for you, it might have a very different meaning. But at the end of the day, I think that we have similarities as to how we define sacred space and what it means to us. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, that part of the episode will be in Spanish. So now we will be switching our conversation to Spanish. ¿Estás lista?
No, I'm just kidding. Let me change to my Spanish voice. I'm just kidding.
Okay, primera pregunta. Tu trabajo con la comunidad es muy variado, ya sea dar pláticas, explorar la cultura indígena, ayudar con protestas o colaborar con diferentes organizaciones. Me interesaría saber qué es lo que te influye.
Una cosa que me vino a mí, como empecé a organizar en el 2010 y no me vino hasta el 2015 o 16, fue ese tema de identidad, ¿no? Por mucho tiempo, la identidad de ser dreamer, la identidad de tener DACA, y mi identidad estaba basada en la política y legislaciones. No estaba basada o no tenía la identidad de yo como una persona. Y hasta el 2015 fui a un entrenamiento con personas indígenas, ¿no? Y empezaron a hablar y es donde aprendí mucho de qué es esto de colonización, qué es esto de política y cómo se meten las leyes con comunidades indígenas. Y me vino a mente nada más el tema de quién soy yo como persona sin las leyes. Y me retó esa conversación dentro de mí misma. Y ahorita mucho del trabajo que hago o con otras organizaciones es basado en si no está la política, ¿qué estamos haciendo? ¿Qué estamos creando con nuestra comunidad aparte de la política? O ya sea el desarrollo de liderazgo, de diferentes habilidades, de diferentes conversaciones, pero tratando de hacerlo de la manera de que no solamente es una legislación, pero es cómo estamos tratando de crear un mundo para personas, para nosotras mismas, en vivir una vida digna, básicamente. Eso es como me gusta verlo ahora, no solamente de leyes, pero también de personas y humanos que nada más queremos vivir en paz, queremos vivir haciendo lo que nos llama a hacer.
Al parecer es una lucha muy difícil para mucha gente y parece ser que va a ser algo que se va a tener que seguir haciendo por varios años, desgraciadamente. Y hablando sobre el tema de hablar en español, el idioma en español, hay mucha gente en este país que no es bilingüe y que batalla con el idioma en inglés. Y entonces me imagino que te ha tocado trabajar con estudiantes o gente mayor donde no más sepa hablar español. Y podrías explicar un poco cómo es el proceso de trabajar con gente que no sabe mucho del idioma en inglés. Entonces, al hablar de política, es muy difícil para que alguien entienda cuando no se traduce en español. Y entonces, esa información no está disponible en español y es importante tener a gente como tú u otros que ayuden a traducir, ayuden a explicar qué es lo que está pasando alrededor de ellos.
Hasta en los medios podemos ver que temas que se ponen en los medios de inglés no son los mismos temas que se ponen en los medios de español. En las organizaciones estamos creando lo que llamamos justicia del lenguaje, y es exactamente eso, es de que cómo estamos proveyendo la oportunidad de que cualquier persona pueda estar involucrada o participar en nuestros eventos y que el lenguaje no sea una barrera, una razón por que no puedan participar. Y la justicia del lenguaje se basa en que estamos proveyendo esa oportunidad para todos, para la participación. Y también es no solamente de interpretar algo de un lenguaje a otro, pero también tenemos que reconocer el mismo sentido con lo que se está interpretando, porque en veces puedes decir una cosa en inglés y si literalmente dices lo mismo en español no se traduce. Entonces, de ser conscientes de eso, también de ser conscientes de que como a veces hasta yo, hay muchas palabras en inglés y luego I'm like, ¿qué significa eso en español? Nunca he usado esa palabra en español, ¿qué es eso? Pero es también reconocer, ¿no? Y ayudar, me ayuda a mí también misma a decir, pues no ves esta palabra, eso no es bueno, ¿qué significa? Pero creo que en total nada más es de que tenemos que proveer las mismas oportunidades para que todos puedan participar y que el lenguaje no sea una barrera, una razón por que no puedan unirse. También quede que muchas personas que no saben en inglés, y también miramos cuando ICE estaba dejando a muchas personas en los autobuses, en los centros de autobuses, y mucha gente ahí no hablaba español tampoco, hablaba su lenguaje indígena. Y nosotros tratábamos de ayudarles como a dónde tienes que ir. Ellos tenían que ir al aeropuerto, ir a otros países o subirse en un autobús de Greyhound e ir a otro país. Y es algo que también me movió porque hasta el español no es un lenguaje que todas las personas usan.
Hablando sobre activismo todavía, uno como activista y líder siempre está interactuando con espacios públicos, creando oportunidades para platicar o expresarse. Me gustaría saber qué es lo que más te apasiona sobre el activismo y el trabajo que haces diariamente.
Sí, creo que mucho de eso es el otro, como hace 2 días creo ya, hicimos con Puente hicimos una conversación con otros activistas que se involucraron en el 2010. Julio 29 ya es el 10º año desde la SB 70, pero tuve la oportunidad de facilitar esa conversación donde hablamos mucho acerca de cómo protestas y demostraciones abren la puerta en ese momento para que la gente de verdad se sienta empoderada, de que de verdad use su voz, de que reten al sistema, de que se enfrenten a estas leyes, a estas demandas, a esos policías de una manera con la cara alta, de una manera de que estamos diciendo, este sistema o política nos quiere oprimir, pero al fin del día si nos vamos a ir con aquí firmes, aquí hablando y representándonos a nosotros mismos, y no nos vamos a ir callados. Y creo que en esos momentos lo que más me siempre recuerdo es la manera y el poder que la gente tiene, y la manera de que toda la gente en ese momento se siente unida con poder, usando su voz, y de que no vamos a estar callados, ya sea de estatus legal, pero también de otras cosas como la comunidad LGBT, de Black Lives Matter, las vidas negras importan. Todos esas comunidades tienen esa manera de usar su voz, de ser empoderados.
Gracias a ti por el trabajo que estás haciendo, gracias por continuar esa conversación con la gente de Phoenix y con los jóvenes también, porque yo creo que también uno a veces no se da el tiempo de trabajar con los jóvenes, y mucha gente que empieza en el activismo empieza desde joven, y es algo que muchos no ven, no entienden que los jóvenes son muy importantes, porque ellos crecen en ese ambiente, y como joven a veces uno se da cuenta de lo que está pasando, y como que caen en ese lugar cuando uno está joven porque es algo que les apasiona. Pues en tu caso también eso pasó, empezaste desde muy joven en el trabajo que estás hoy en día. Hablando de trabajo, hablemos sobre Ganas Apparel. ¿Cuál fue la inspiración tras el nombre, el concepto? ¿Qué consejos tienes para la gente interesada en crear su propio negocio, especialmente siendo un dreamer?
So, Ganas Apparel vino con yo y Carla Chavarría, que es una buena amiga que tengo, y nos conocimos por el movimiento también, ¿no? Y fue en un momento donde las dos reconocimos de que si estamos haciendo este trabajo para la comunidad, nosotros mismas tenemos que enfrentar y poner al centro nuestra propia salud, especialmente en comunidades de color, donde, por decir, miramos como a la salud como una dieta, ¿no? Y está cambiando por el tiempo que pasa, pero creciendo me decían, oh, ¿quieres ponerte? Toda la gente hablaba de esa dieta, ¿no? ¿Qué es eso? Pero es como miramos nuestra salud en una forma de vida, no en una dieta. Y cómo podemos poner prioridad a nuestra salud para que nosotros mismas estemos bien, para poder salir con nuestra comunidad y organizar o luchar con la comunidad también. Pero vino de esa manera, de que yo y Carla al mismo tiempo reconocimos la importancia de dar prioridad a nuestra salud para poder continuar con ese trabajo de comunidad. Entonces fue para como a promover, para ojalá inspirar a otras personas a que nosotros merecemos tener buena salud, merecemos preocuparnos y cuidar de nuestro propio cuerpo, de cómo nos estamos sintiendo, y traer ese mensaje a la comunidad para que lo empecemos a ver de esa manera para muchos años que vienen. Y para personas como que quieran empezar su propio negocio, es como, esa es una oportunidad de que muchas personas con ideas, o bueno, tienes que hacer un plan de negocio también, pero la oportunidad de crear un negocio ya sea con DACA o sin DACA existe. Entonces fue también una oportunidad de que si te quitan DACA, ¿cómo puedes hacer tu propio trabajo? ¿Cómo puedes ofrecer consultaciones? Es algo que se puede hacer al menos aquí en el estado de Arizona, y es algo que muchas personas están tomando esa oportunidad, pero también cae, ¿no? De que si tu sueño es crear un negocio, pues es algo que deberías de hacer y crecer durante el tiempo.
Me da gusto saber que has cumplido un sueño de que muchas personas también aspiran de tener un negocio propio. Entonces es bueno ver que alguien más lo haya logrado. Máxima, eres un gran ejemplo para la comunidad latina al mostrar que se pueden alcanzar los sueños y luchar sin importar los obstáculos que se te atraviesen. Te quiero dar las gracias de nuevo por compartir tu historia, por hablar conmigo y simplemente por compartir tu mensaje y todo lo que haces. Before we end our conversation, are there any final thoughts or words of advice that you'd like to share with the audience?
Ooh, I don't know. All my secrets are gonna come out. No, I think just like a lot of, I guess there's like two questions that are pretty common now. I guess that people are like, if someone wants to get involved, how do they get involved? And I think I always say the most important thing is to just show up. Like, you don't have to know about politics. You don't have to have all the right answers. You don't need to know. When I first got involved, I knew nobody that was in that meeting. I didn't know anyone that was there. So you don't need to know people. Your friends don't want to come on your own. You don't need to know like politics. You don't need to have the right answers. You just need to be willing to show up. And show up, try to do, or like sign up to volunteer for something, and that's how you're gonna figure out what sticks for you and what role you want to have in the movement. You don't have to just know and have the answer. And then another question that people now are like, so given what happened after you got arrested, would you still do it again? And I'm like, well, I didn't purposely get arrested, so that's not my plan. But I think it's also important to recognize sort of like, the agency. I think it's really important for people to always have their own agency over what they want to do. And I think it's important to have that opportunity to not take away power from somebody. And I think it's important to also recognize, like the DACA, there was also the DACA announcement that came out, I don't know, sometime a few weeks ago. And, the DACA, so the Supreme Court ruled that DACA was going to stay. And so if the Supreme Court had ruled that DACA was not going to stay, would then DACA recipients just stay at home, or would they start showing up to protest? And I think that, if we look at it that way, then it's also why are we not showing up for Black Lives Matter in the same way that we can show up for our own community? And I think at the end of the day, it's just, know your rights, know where you're at, and you can feel when you should leave a place or should stay in a place. So just follow your instincts, and there's plenty of different ways to be involved and engaged in whatever it is you want to do. But it is really important that during this time, it is the opportunity and the time for people to engage in these conversations.